I call the member for Maitland.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker, and I rise to speak on the Aboriginal Languages Bill 2017, and in doing that I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and their elders past and present and future, and the elders of the Wonnarua people, which is the country that I come from in Maitland, and also my local Aboriginal Land Council of Minda River. This is such an important bill. We all know, as people who work every day with words, with language of our own, who tell stories, who make rules and decisions about how people will live their lives using words, we know the power of words. The member for Ryde spoke in his speech about the desire of Aboriginal people to name the way that they reawoken their own languages, using nests rather than lighthouses, and I think that is a really indicative story because it talks about the themes of self-determination that the member for Swansea so articulately spoke of, and really it is at the heart of all that we are all trying to achieve today, to allow people, the First Nations people of our country, to be able to articulate and express themselves as they wish to do. And I pay tribute to the former minister, the current minister and member for Ryde, as another former minister, and of course our shadow minister here, David Harris. This is something that can't be achieved by white people. It is something that has to be achieved by Aboriginal people telling us what they want from us. Language is the way that we all define our world, and I guess coming from my background and working in how people think, working in culture and identity in my early working career, I want to drill down into that because we know that this is the important thing to do, but I think it's so important to take this moment not just to look at the unjust practices of the past and the unjust laws that have been levied against Aboriginal people, but also to really express our understanding of how important this particular action that we take today is. As someone who's travelled across the world, I've spoken a few languages in a very basic format. I've read authors of other languages. I've had friends, very close friends, whose first language has not been English. I've been very interested from an early age in communication between people. And I've always had a very strong respect for the way language defines our relationships with each other, our relationship with our world, ourselves even, and our experiences, and the way that it defines how we reach out to each other and the way that it defines how we turn away from each other. To take away the very thing that someone uses to speak to their family takes away their experiences, their thoughts and their memories. It takes away their culture and their history on that broader macro level, but on the very individual basis, it constrains thoughts and feelings. And I remember when I worked at immigration, and this was a big issue of talking about how people who came to Australia and had to then learn English as adults, how would they impart their culture and knowledge to their children, and whether they should learn English and teach their children English, whether they should retain their language and teach that to them. And there was a lot of discussion about that at a theoretical level. And I know there was always one school of thought that migrant parents should retain that first language and speak that to their children because it imparted a sense that the world that they brought with them to Australia had some sense of order and rules and important understandings that they as parents, as elders of those families, understood that in a way that becoming a second speaker or a speaker of a second language does not impart that authority and knowledge of the culture. And I think when we, as a society, took away the right of Aboriginal people to speak their language, I think it's impossible actually back in that time to to understand fully the impact that that loss has on those families. Because when we take away culture from elders, it disempowers the elders, it disempowers the parents, it disempowers the community and the youth, and eventually it disempowers the whole culture. And so that is why it is so important that we act to do everything we can to value Aboriginal languages, to value the retention and the reawakening of those languages. And you know, look at the contribution that everyone has made, and I've sat in the House for quite a while tonight, listening to people talk about this issue. We all have our own perspectives, we all have our own shared experiences, and the abilities that we have in our own languages to express those views. If we go back to times when people lost that their ability or the right to speak in their own language and then had to suddenly progress their political and cultural dialogue in a foreign language is just unthinkable. When we give back things like language, when we understand the depth of the crime that we have committed against that culture in stealing that language from them, we must return them freely. And I think that that's been spoken about quite importantly and appropriately today in some of those amendments of ensuring that Aboriginal people continue to have or gain the ability and under the law to retain the control of their own languages and to be able to work out how they were used. Many years ago now, I had a very strong relationship with a woman from Cootamandra, Margaret Cossey, who was a special needs teacher, and she worked with a lot of children with special literacy needs, including Aboriginal children, on what she called the Aboriginal Book Project, and the Aboriginal Book Project eventually became Indigi Readers. And I just want to share with the House something that I think she was trying to achieve, and not to speak on her behalf, but in this whole process, I think it was very useful for me to look at it, because she was teaching these kids who came from a culture which had been so abused, the trauma that they experienced, you know, in a multi-generational level. They needed to have their own stories, to value the own stories of their culture. And learning about Jack and Jill going up the hill, or Sparky the space chimp, you know, from my childhood reading, was just so out of the realm of these children's experience. It was making that written and language experience for them alien and not, and just putting more barriers to them learning. And so she, Margaret, worked with authors and illustrators who were Indigenous Australians to tell their stories to publish readers that children from those communities could then actually engage with on a better way. And that turned into a great not-for-profit company to develop those aids. I just really want to talk about, at the end of this, really around language being a tool of communication. It requires trust, it requires respect, and it requires understanding in order to get a message across. And the significance of language in every interaction that we have as humans is so important. And I hope that everyone who is involved in the implementation of this legislation and the ongoing management of it and the development of the strategic plan works together to ensure that we engender that trust, we retain that respect, and we develop that understanding. Because it doesn't matter what language we speak, if we don't listen, then we have no communication. I very much confirm the bill to the House, and I give my respect and appreciation to those who've been involved in the drafting of it and the Aboriginal people who came to Parliament House to share their culture with us, but I want to thank them for their understanding of our inability at times to deliver what they want, but their patience with working with us until we get it right. Thank you.